Culture is said to be the cornerstone of any organization. Without a culture where employees feel secure, valued, and respected, an organization will crumble. Yet we hear so many horror stories of bosses running their organizations to the ground, or employees who do not feel part of the team and ultimately only care for themselves. It's time for leaders to step forward and develop an organizational culture where everyone matters, where everyone is valued, and where everyone can thrive. Today, my guest Claudette Rowley and I discuss how leaders can use cultural brilliance to establish a culture to achieve all those things within their organization, how leaders can ensure they communicate properly to their organization, how a leader can know if their organizational culture is changing, and what are some immediate practical steps leaders can do tomorrow to improve their organization's culture. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, episode 70, Developing Cultural Brilliance with Claudette Rowley. Welcome one and all to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. It's your host and founder, Scott McCarthy. And thank you for coming out yet again to listen to me and world-class guests such as Claudette discuss so many important topics such as leadership and everything revolving around leadership, from developing yourself personally to developing teams, which is one of the things we'll be touching on today, to developing your organization, which is primary focus of today's topics. But we're all about one thing here, one thing only, right? And that's how we can help you become a better leader, because we all know there's just too many bosses out there in the world. And I know you don't want to become one of those. So thank you again yet for tuning in to today's episode. And before I dive into today's episode, I just wanted to give a quick invite to you. Invite because I don't see you in my free mastermind community where we discuss leadership every day. What are you waiting for? Why are you not there is my question. Because there are so many people there right now. And every day we discuss leadership, and those folks are getting more out of moving forward leadership than what you're getting simply by just listening to this podcast. I'm in there weekly doing live videos, daily with articles and topics for discussion. And you know what? I invite every single guest to the mastermind. And finally, it's free, folks. 100% free. It always will be. Why? Because I only care about one thing, providing value to you. That is it. And this is one of the best ways that I can do so. So again, if you're interested in joining the Moving Forward Leadership Mastermind, it's in the show notes. Or if you just go to movingforwardleadership.com/mastermind, you can join that way, and it will redirect you to the Facebook group. Finally, if you're a super manual person and you forget all that stuff, you can just search it on Facebook and you'll find us right there. So I received an advance copy of Claudette's book, Cultural Brilliance, and I must say it was quite the interesting read. One of the things that really stuck out to me was the simple system that she has developed through her experience and written about it to help leaders develop culture within their organization. And you're probably wondering, well, who's Claudette anyway? She's a change management consultant, a cultural designer, executive coach, and she's just passionate about helping leaders and organizations resolve complex organizational problems in ways that honor the intelligence and the cultural systems of the people within the organization. For 20 years, she's consulted, trained, and coached executive leaders from Fortune 500 companies to small business to higher education, startups, and everything else in between. She's got a hockey sock full of qualifications and clients. And yes, that was a very Canadian thing to say there, hockey sock full. The bottom line is she's more than qualified to discuss this topic. And you'll hear the conversation that we have in just a moment. And you can hear the passion in her voice more importantly than the intelligence in her answer, that she knows what she's talking about when it comes to developing a organizational culture. And as I said at the intro, there are just too many organizations out there with, I'll say it, crappy cultures, garbage cultures, cultures that just breed taking care of myself, cultures that breed backstabbing, cultures that breed only caring about the bottom line, cultures that are ultimately destructive. Your organization, no matter where you sit in the organizational hierarchy, whether you're a middle manager, whether you're a C-suite executive, whether you're an entrepreneur with a startup, your culture doesn't have to be this way. Don't allow it to be this way. And hopefully you take some things out of today's podcast episode and apply it right away, today, tomorrow, next week, doesn't matter. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoy this show. And now sit back, relax, and enjoy my interview with Claudette Rowley discussing how you can develop a cultural brilliance. Claudette, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Oh, thanks, Scott. I'm really happy to be here.
So, as we were discussing before I just hit record, thanks a million for a copy of the book. It was a great read for a leadership and organizational theory geek like myself. It's a great read.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate you reading it and great to hear that you liked it. Yeah, that's wonderful.
And for the audience out there, before we actually even dive into the episode today, heads up, if you're part of the mailing list at movingforwardleadership.com, or if you're part of the Moving Forward Leadership Mastermind, one of you folks is going to win my copy of the book. I'm gonna reach out to you and send it out to you. So if you're listening to this, you best hurry up and get onto one, or if not both, to double your chances, grab this copy. So just a little plug there before we even dive into the show today.
Sounds good.
So the one thing I always like to do with all my guests is, get them to give a bit of a background about themselves, how they got into what they're into, how they got to where they are today. How did you get your passion for leadership and organizational culture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. It actually goes back to a couple jobs I had in my mid and late 20s, actually. So like a while ago.
5 years ago?
Yeah. Oh, that's so nice of you. 5 years ago, right? But I had two jobs, and the first job was I worked for the state government, and it was and this particular state government had a great culture, which is unusual for state government, at least in the United States. It's often not thought of as having a really vibrant culture. And I had a great manager, and he essentially said, "I'd like you to start this particular program." I was a social worker at the time. And as long as you stay within these certain parameters, you can do whatever you want, as long as you meet these goals. So he gave me all this autonomy, all this creativity, and I loved it. And it was amazing. And I really thrived. And then I moved to another part of the country and got a job working for a large nonprofit, which still exists, does great work in the world. But at the time, their culture was toxic. It was absolutely toxic. And the thing I noticed was that although I had a good job and I did a good job, my confidence really started to slide in the toxic environment. And I didn't know anything about culture. I mean, no one was really talking about culture. I didn't know anything about it. It was in my 20s. But I got really interested in leadership at that point. And I actually started to read books on leadership. I had no idea what I was going to do with that information at the time, but I got really interested in it. And, one thing kind of led to the next. And then over time, I realized that leadership was a big part of it, but culture also really mattered. And so those two experiences really started my passion, I would say, in this arena.
No, I love that whole comparison of the two organizations. And it's funny because we have the same thing up here in Canada. Government organizations, generally culture is not the first thing that comes to mind, right? It's usually bureaucratic, process driven, yada, yada, not allowing much flexibility and stuff like that. So it's pretty neat. That's where you got that experience from.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. It is neat.
So moving forward, where did the inspiration for the book come from? Because I assume obviously it the seed was basically planted from those experiences, but were there other experiences along the road that basically driven the experience, your inspiration?
Yeah, there were. So I've had my business, which is organizational development and coaching business, for 19 years. So I've done a lot of, as many entrepreneurs do, I've done a lot of different things because, within that, but I reinvented it because I needed, creative stimulation and challenge. But one thing I noticed was over time is that the thing that really was going on in most organizations I've worked in was around their culture, whether it was coming in doing training, executive coaching, right, whatever it was, other kinds of organizational development work. Culture was almost always at the root of their issues, although we weren't really talking about it because people, as we know, didn't really start talking about culture a lot till the last 5 years, maybe, right? 5 or 7 years. And so I don't know, about 3 or 4 years ago, I needed another change in my business, and I was kind of at a crossroads. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. And so I did a bunch of kind of soul searching and investigation and discovered, it was about culture. I wanted to do something that was really at the root cause of organizational dysfunction. And I felt that culture was really it. And so it was exciting for me to come up, I book it, as you know, is a process and a roadmap for helping organizations transform their culture. So I wanted to come up with my own solution to that problem. So that's what inspired the book.
No, it's really good. And I liked it. And one of the things that really jumped out at me at the beginning of it was how you used the Venn diagram. And I was like, I haven't really seen that often before.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the inspiration behind that? And I know we'll dive into each portion of the diagram, but, how you came about in realizing, this is basically the one pager of the book, the process was essentially that diagram.
Thank you for asking. That's such an interesting question. And I'm just thinking back. I think because it was originally the process it's a 3-phase process for those who haven't, and like you said, we'll dive into it, haven't seen the book, with 3 transitional phases, but originally it was a 5-step process. Mm-hmm. That was the first iteration of it, which of course is not in the book. And then I played around with it for a while. I did different things with it for several months, and then finally realized I had 3 main phases: the authenticity, design, and integration. And I was working with someone who was a mentor for me in the process, and she maybe even put it in the Venn diagram, but it just made sense because we realized brilliance was the middle of that diagram, right? Where all those 3 sections, phases overlapped, the authenticity, design, and integration. If you had all those working, you'd have brilliance. And that's, I think, in a conversation, how we came up with it.
Yeah, no,
it makes sense intuitively. Yeah.
Yeah, it does make sense. And it's something, if you go back to the beginning, what you just said there, it was linear first. And I've read a lot of books from just my casual reading on leadership and organizational culture and design and all this stuff, and through my MBA and all my other studies. And I've always seen these processes linear driven. Tick, 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 tick. Yeah. Sorry, I just hit my mic. But then when I noticed the Venn, I'm like, it makes absolute sense. The Venn, because culture and organizational change and all this, it shouldn't be linear.
Right.
It should be cyclical. It should be in it's essentially a never ending process. And that's how when I finished looking and reading your book, it's what really jumped out at me, which is something that I never got from anywhere else before.
Thanks for that. I appreciate that observation. That's really interesting. And it is a cyclical process. Like you said, you're never done, and the book, the last transition phase in the book even talks about that, figure out what you've learned, right? And then
start over
again, in a way, right? Yep. You've done the hardest part of it the first time, but
absolutely. But
you'll be on another cycle because the culture is always evolving, and you can't just go through you can't go through a linear process because it won't work.
No, for sure. All right, so let's talk about it. I've been dying here to get into it. I know you are. And my favorite part, I want to dive into my favorite part, which is authenticity, because
okay, great.
To me, that's basically a cornerstone of leadership. If you're not authentic, you've got nothing. So let's talk about authenticity from, the cultural brilliance standpoint, and how you came about it and what it means in this context.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Well, it's interesting because when you asked about the Venn diagram, I'm now remembering a couple earlier pieces of the development and evolution of cultural brilliance, the system. And initially I did not have authenticity. I had design and I had the integration, and for integration for folks listening is really just the implementation piece of the design. And I didn't have authenticity, and someone asked me about it, and I realized the authenticity piece was so natural for me, I forgot to mention it, if that makes sense. Yeah. It was something I would naturally do in any organization, so I forgot to put it down in a way. And someone pointed it out and said, you got to actually talk about the authenticity. And I said, oh, that makes a lot of sense. The authenticity piece is really about an organization understanding how their culture really operates. Okay. So how does it work? What's great about it? What's brilliant about it? What's not so great, right? What's the good, the bad, and the ugly, so to speak, in understanding it. And another cornerstone to it that's a cornerstone of all the whole cultural brilliance idea is psychological safety. That it is, for those who aren't familiar, it simply means that interpersonal risk taking is safe in an organization. So that which means that I can share an idea, I can share an unpopular opinion, I can disagree with someone, and I'm not going to be worried that it's going to be used against me. I'll be stabbed in the back. There'll be any sort of retribution. It doesn't mean I may get constructive feedback. People may disagree with me, and that's all fine, but it's still safe because nothing's going to happen to me that's negative in terms of my job. And so that to me is a big part of authenticity, is to have that sort of that psychological safety, that kind of trust. And then because when you have that, as you know from your work, you can tell the truth. That's the biggest form of authenticity. If I can tell the truth about my experience in an organization. So that's the authenticity piece in a nutshell.
No, to me, it's so crucial because so many people out there will go, oh, I'll just tell the boss what I think he or she wants to hear, right? What they want to hear, but he's telling them the truth. And all suddenly that whole authenticity piece starts going out the window slowly because you're not actually giving out that ground truth. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait, now why is things going astray? So that's why I've always said it's truly the cornerstone of any organization, any leadership, is if you're not authentic, if you don't actually tell people what you think and what you mean, everything just goes sideways from there because the baseline is false. It's a false premise to begin with.
Right, and then you end up with the leader or manager, right, who's being told what people think they want to hear, not getting actually the right information.
And not being able to make the right decisions.
Right. They can't even make the right decisions. They don't have the right information. And it just, like you said, it spirals downward and goes sideways from there. It doesn't actually work. It doesn't make anything better.
Right. Yeah. So authenticity obviously is the start line.
Yeah.
Let's talk about adaptogen design, because obviously this is, to me, this was the meat and potatoes, right? This is really, you roll up the sleeves, time to get to work.
Kind of get to work, right. The assessment work. And so authenticity, in that phase, we do all the assessment work and understanding how culture operates, and then move into adaptogen design. And for those who aren't familiar with the word adaptogen, because I wasn't until a couple of years ago myself.
I got your book.
Yeah, right. It's not a common word, except in certain circles, but it's essentially some sort of herbal substance like ginseng or maca, things that exist in nature that some people take to. And it rebalances your system. That's the idea, right? It helps restore system to our bodily functions, restore health to our bodily systems. And so a mentor of mine a couple of years ago had taken adaptogens that had helped her actually recover from a severe illness she had, in addition to traditional medicine. And she said, what she was talking about, she said, what would an adaptogen culture look like? And so she challenged me to was that even an interesting idea? What would that look like? So because I'm an idea, geek, I went with that, and it actually made sense to me. And I'm like, what if we had a culture that could be designed to rebalance itself, right? Back to health. What could, whatever's healthy, a healthy state for that organization. And I believe cultures are like fingerprints. No two are alike. They may be similar. They may overlap, but they're not, they're unique. So, what's going to rebalance one culture will not rebalance another. So that's the idea behind this adaptogen design, is how do we design a culture that can rebalance itself? One of the key pieces to it, I talk about this in the book, is this idea of looking at culture as a system. And, for those who don't think a lot about systems. The weather's a system, nature's a system, right? So those are two great examples of incredible systems. What's happening in one part of the country impacts what's happening in another part of the country. And the same thing in organizations. An organizational set of systems will have the same thing. You know, what's happened in sales is going to impact what's happened in engineering or purchasing, et cetera, right? Or the shipping department, all sorts of things. So, when we look at culture from a systems perspective, that's another piece of this adaptogen design is you're designing an actual change to the system, and you're looking at how you can get that system to behave differently over time. So it's not just changing culture around things like morale or engagement, which are important and parts of culture. It's looking at it at a much deeper level so you can make a fundamental change.
No, I like all that. And I especially like the one part there where you talked about how each organization is not the same. And when I'm doing my coaching calls with clients, it's so funny how many times I hear, well, what's the template to fix this problem? I'm like, well, yes, I can give you a template, but the problem is there's no cookie cutter solution, right?
Right.
And that's what a lot of bosses, I'm going to refer to them as bosses or leaders, look for. They just want the quick fix solution, the template. So I just go, okay, cut. Boom, done, and all my problems are gone. I'm like, no. This is something you have to analyze. Take this template which you were given, overlay it over your organization,
right, and
then do the actual analysis to say, okay, what parts actually make sense, which ones I need to put more focus on, which ones I don't need to put more focus on. Every organization is different, just like every person is different.
Oh yeah, completely. And there's no. You know, the book I wanted to create something that people could take and apply to their organization, but I believe every application would look different in some ways, right? You're going to have a completely different outcome at each phase of the process. So you can't even take a cookie cutter approach.
No, you can't at all.
Not at all. And I think one thing that is a pet peeve of mine in culture work is, you know, people will say, hey, here are 3 easy steps to have an amazing culture. That's impossible. You can't do that. Because then you don't understand how culture works if you think there are 3 easy steps.
There's nothing easy. It is a lot of work.
Right.
And that's one of the things that people, I think, fail to realize. And unfortunately, with today's culture, talking about culture, today's culture that I like to refer to as the drive-through culture. So we want everything in 2 minutes or less, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, quick 3 easy steps. Well, you know what? This stuff is long, slog, hard. And this conversation that we're having, you know, it's only going to be half an hour or so in length. It may make it seem quick and easy, but it's not. To me, like, this for me, and again, it would depend on the size of your organization, how complex it is. Yeah. Someone who has a small organization obviously would be able to do this much quicker than someone who has a, multinational corporation. But this is something that's long, and you're taking your time and being deliberate, going through this. It's a slog. Like, it's going to take you a bit, but in the end, you're going to get the results.
Yeah, in the end, you're going to get the results. And I find, there are parts of it that are definitely a slog, right? Like, why can't we get this to shift or change? Or people, the way the process works is it has a lot of involvement and I think this is a key point, from people from all parts of the organization, all, different teams, different departments, different levels. It's not let's get the leaders together and have them redesign the culture. That doesn't work anyway. So when you have people involved, sometimes I've noticed they'll get excited and then they get discouraged because things aren't changing fast enough, right? So you have that, understandably, right? But you have that up and downness to it, right? The peaks and the valleys, and that does make it challenging sometimes.
No, for sure. So we talked about adaptive and I can't even say that word.
Adaptogen design, yeah.
Thank you. And yes, I'm keeping that in. I'm not editing that out. We keep this real here. Let's talk about aware integration, because I think we're kind of diving slowly moving into that.
Yeah.
So let's hear your point of view on that.
Sure. So aware integration is the third main phase of the cultural brilliance system. And it's really, it's where we're planning and implementing the change that's been designed. And I called it aware integration because, even though someone told me that wasn't technically grammatically correct, but I went with it anyway. Went with my intuition on it.
It's your book. You can do
It's
what you
my
want.
book. Exactly. Exactly. But because when you're implementing change, it's incredibly important to do it with a new mindset and with the new behavior. So those of us that coach and consult have seen that sometimes organizations will say something like, we're going to change how we communicate and improve it. Right? Okay, great. And then while they're talking about, then they decide how they're going to do that. And then while they're implementing that change, they use all their old communication patterns. That doesn't even make sense, right? They forget, right? It's just an awareness issue. They forget to use the new ways of communicating to implement it. So a simple example, so that's one thing I talk a lot about with clients is as you're implementing this change, we need to keep in mind the new mindsets, the new behaviors we've decided on, any new systems or structures. And so that's why I called it aware integration. But it's where we're taking the design and we're literally talking about how it functionally will exist and integrate with the rest of the organization. So it's a lot of planning, a lot of communication plans, a lot of, getting feedback on how things are working, how they're not working, prototyping things, trying them out and moving through that actual implementation process. And it's usually the longest phase. Definitely, right? Which makes sense because that's the rubber's hitting the road there, right? Yeah. We're doing actual change at that point.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
If you rolled up your sleeves in the previous step, you might as well just take your shirt off in this step, kind of.
Right. You're just right.
Grab the shovel.
I was just thinking that. I grab the hammer, grab the shovel, right?
No, you hit on one to me is probably the most crucial point. And that's communication, and all the missteps I've seen in organizations in leadership and all that. It's been, to me, basically, for the 98% of the time, an issue with communication. Mm-hmm. So what are some steps for leaders out there when they're implementing this cultural change to ensure that they're communicating properly with their organizations, with their teams, so that there are no assumptions or miscommunication mishaps?
Yeah, and I agree. It's so easy for those kinds of mishaps to happen. So I think, I actually write, partner with companies, organizations to write actual communication plans. How are we, just like you have a PR plan or a marketing plan, that same kind of communication. What are we messaging, right, to everybody, especially if it's a large company? How often are we going to communicate? How are we going to get feedback, right? If it's a lot of people, you have a town hall meeting, is it going to be an online feedback mechanism? What's going to happen to the feedback, right? So we have that all in place. What kind of, messaging at regular intervals so people know change is coming. They're not going to be surprised. They're not going to be, they're not going to be shocked or rattled. And I'm a big believer in over communicating, especially at the beginning. And how sometimes as a leader, and leaders come by this honestly, they forget because they've already worked through adjusting or adapting to a change. They forget what a huge impact it will have usually on the person receiving it because they've already become accustomed to it, right? They made the decision. They've gotten used to it. And it's a common mistake leaders make. And I'm often saying, wait, hold on. Remember, you've had 2 weeks to get used to this. Everyone else is just hearing it.
Yeah.
You've got to get some people having resistance, having questions, being unsure about it.
And you got to be aware and ready for all the different scenarios, right? The ones that are open arms, like, oh, change, like me. I love change, right? Or then you have the 60-odd-year-old who's been at the company for 35 years and like, change. No. I've been doing my job like this for 25 years now. You ain't changing squat, whippersnapper.
Yeah. And then I call the wait and see people. Right?
Yeah.
Kind of wait and see and that's true of I think almost all changes. We have the people who are not into it. People think it's great because they love change. And then the people who are like, well, I'm just going to wait and see. We'll see what happens. Yeah.
For sure. And you have to be aware of all that.
All of that, yeah. So
we've talked about the three core steps. We've talked about communication, and we kind of hinted at this. What I'd like to know is, how can a leader know that their organizational culture is starting to change? Because, like you said, you're going to get in this period, especially in a larger organization. Like you're going to feel like nothing's actually happening, especially you're at the top, right? And it's like, oh no, it's been months. We've implemented these changes, and nothing's, we're still doing the same stuff. But there's always these little micro indications, I like to refer to them as that.
Oh, yeah, I like
things
that.
are starting to shift. So what are some of those, some of those indications out there that leaders can go, okay, wait, now things are starting to pick up. They are starting to change slowly. And all of a sudden you do start seeing those big steps forward.
Yeah. Thanks for that question. It's so important. A couple things. One is that when I'm working with a company, we actually talk about how will people need to think and act differently for this change to occur. So mindset and behavior, what will they be thinking differently, which means they're probably saying things differently, and how will they be behaving differently? So we'll have those metrics in place that we're looking for, and it's not about turning people into robots or anything, but generally speaking, right? What are they, what are they saying? And so we'll have those metrics in place, and anything else that a company wants to definitely see happen, we'll have those metrics in place. And then there's the casual, informal signs, like you were saying, I think, right? It could be that the person who never speaks up in a meeting does, right? It will start like you said, micro indicators. It will start very small. And usually my experience, right? There'll be these little things that you could almost miss or dismiss as not a big deal, right? Or, a team that almost always misses a deadline doesn't miss it, things like that. And what I find with a lot of leaders is if they're not, they either tend to dismiss it as unimportant because it's so micro, right? Or they miss it altogether as anything meaningful. And so what I'm doing is I watch for those things, like I'm sure you do. And as I watch for them and note them, I'm then telling telling the leaders, whoever, should know about it, like this is starting to shift. Let's watch this and see if the team that usually misses a deadline and didn't continues to meet the deadlines, for example, right?
Right.
Are they actually changing? And then we can ask them, so what? We noticed why you're really successful meeting your deadlines. What shifted for you? What occurred or happened? Was it related to the cultural work? Is it something else? What's going on? But you really want to watch for those micro indicators because they are the first sign you're going to get. Yeah, definitely.
No, I love it. And especially love that whole, not necessarily jumping right away, making sure that you got a good enough sample size to say, okay, wait now.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. It's not a one-time deal that section didn't miss their deadline and also the next week they're back to doing the old habits and things. But when you start seeing it, and I always like, reinforcing it as the leader, like, hey guys, great work the past month. You guys have been knocking it out of the park. And then all of a sudden you're like exponentially reinforcing the behaviors that you want, the culture that you want, and the work that you want out of them.
Absolutely. It makes a huge difference. Yeah.
Claudette, as we wind down here, I only got a couple questions left for you.
Okay.
One of the things I like here at Moving Forward Leadership, I try to get some practical advice for the audience. So what are some practical steps that leaders out there that are listening to this show right now, what are some things they can do tomorrow, today even, to help improve their organizational culture?
Well, one of the first things they can do is listen. So in the book, I call it listening to what you hear.
Absolutely.
And simple, but as we know, not always easy. And so it's listening to what you hear versus what you had wanted to hear or hoped to hear. And I've worked with leaders and these are well-intentioned leaders, right? Good leaders, and they sometimes have a really hard time also to say, no, you have to listen to what this person's saying. It really is important, even though it's hard to hear. And I find that when leaders start listening to what they hear, even if it's sometimes really hard and not what they wanted and might even be painful, it opens the door to new awarenesses, right? Which then allows them to take different actions or maybe investigate further or get more facts or data, whatever is important there. So that's one. And related to that is being something I call being a cultural detective. It's actually not in the book, but it's literally what it sounds like. Observing. Trying to look at the organization and the culture as though you're standing outside of it, being a neutral observer as much as possible, right? Without your bias, we all have biases, right? Without bias, without assumption as much as you can, dropping preconceived notions about this person's this way and that part of the culture is that way and this team is something else, right? All those opinions we form over time. Yeah. Trying to drop all that and say, if I looked at this situation or these people or this culture with fresh eyes, what would I notice is going on here? And those are two things that don't cost anything, right? That don't take a lot of time, that leaders could take and try tomorrow and just start noticing. What do they really hear and what are they seeing?
No, those are seriously great advice tips for the audience out there, especially the listening one. It's so often I find leaders out there just, they talk for the sake of talking, but it's like, no, shut up and listen for once and actually listen to what your people are telling you. And then the whole, not having preconceived ideas and notions of people and sections and teams and stuff. It's like, how many times have we heard it? Like, ooh, those guys over there, you don't want to deal with them if you have to avoid it.
Right. Oh, they have this identity, right? A persona that is probably at least partly true, but isn't entirely. And it often creates a sense of one-dimensionality, right? That these are not people with thoughts, feelings, emotions, or a team with all of that, right? That dealing with stressors and other challenges. They just become like these one-dimensional figures. And people stop listening then and really noticing, paying attention.
No, love it all. Claudette, it's been a great chat. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking about it. I've thoroughly enjoyed reading the book. And again, for the audience out there, I'm going to be giving away my copy. So be sure to subscribe to the newsletter and be sure to join the Moving Forward Leadership Mastermind, so that you get your chance to grab this copy of the book. Claudette, I always, finish up my, conversations with one last question. And that is, to you, what makes a great leader?
What makes a great leader? I think the listening piece we talked about, being open-minded, being willing to tell their own truth and have tough conversations, which is a lot harder than it sounds. I think good leaders also have a lot of courage and heart and vulnerability. And I think those are not, quote, soft skills. I think they're the hardest skills. And then the ability, of course, to take action on all of that and move forward in ways that are hopefully, galvanizing people and pulling them forward in really positive ways.
No, I couldn't agree more. And especially the whole soft skill, hard skill thing. The ones that they refer to as quote unquote soft skills are definitely the hardest to master. So it's the point of the show where I like to flip the mic over and, let you take over the show for, next 30 seconds to a minute. Feel free to give yourself a shameless plug. Where can people find the book? How can they reach you if they want to reach out? And, learn more about cultural brilliance.
Thanks. Yeah. So, the website is a great place, which is culturalbrilliance.com. The book is also on Amazon. The book is on the website. You can contact me through the website. My phone number, email are there. And also a new resource page on the site I'm mentioning, that has I have a radio show, so it has my podcasts, other podcasts I've been on, articles. There's a free, complimentary, cultural assessment guide I put together. So lots of interesting resources on that, culturalbrilliance.com/resource.
Awesome. For the audience out there, as always, it's easy for you guys. Just go to movingforwardleadership.com/70. And all the links there will be in the show notes, for you guys. Her website, her profile on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and including the link to the book on Amazon. Claudette, it's been a pleasure. It's been an honor having you on the show. Again, can't thank you enough for your time.
Oh, thanks so much, Scott. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Take care now. So hope you enjoyed that show today, folks. Wasn't it a great episode? Again, if you're interested in a copy of the book, great read, by the way. And yes, audience, there is a free copy that's going to be sent out. Actually, sorry to tell you, I said that at the time of recording, but the free copy's already been shipped out to one lucky member of the Moving Forward Leadership community. So, sorry, I kind of jumped the gun, but I just got really excited to get this out. Don't worry, there'll be more book giveaways in the future, no doubt for sure. But the lesson is make sure of that. You're either on the mailing list or you're in the mastermind so that I can go ahead and shoot you a freebie from time to time, such as books. Or maybe you'll be one of the lucky ones that get an email from me saying, hey, congratulations, you're getting a free coaching call if you want it. Oh, by the way, which I've done in the past as well. But again, I can't give you those things if I don't know who you are. And I know there are thousands of you listening. If you want to be eligible for these freebies, then you got to be either part of the mastermind or on my mailing list. Anyway, that's my shameless plug for those two things now. as always, if you enjoy this show, if you enjoyed this episode, never forget R squared, S squared. Rate and review. Why? So that other people can see that the content that's coming out here for you is top notch, is the best that it can be. S, share. Share this with someone who you think could benefit from the message today's podcast. Share it with someone who is currently trying to develop a organizational culture or who needs to change their organizational culture. And then finally, subscribe. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any episode. And you can do that simply by going to movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. That's all I got for you today. As always, keep pushing, keep trying, keep moving forward. Take care now.